Hey everyone, and welcome to Groove Builders, the show where we create together. I'm your host, Disorderly Cone, and in this episode, we're going to be building our very first truck here on the show, a Western Star 5700 XE Phantom from Metal Earth. Now, I'm pretty excited to build this build, not just because of all the unique shaping and of course tons of parts, but because I actually drive a Western Star. That's right, I don't just build models all day, I actually work as a hydrovac operator working on a smaller version, or I should say a modified version, of the 4900 from Western Star. Now, I can't be the only metal model builder out there that works on trucks, or at least drives trucks, so if you do at home, I would love to know what you work on or drive on in the comments down below. Now, to get back to building here, this build looks a little bit tricky, but I'm sure that we can do it together. Groovers, let's get down to the workbench and take a look at the package.
Groove Builders, welcome to the workbench. We have our Western Star 5700 XE here in some pretty cool Metal Earth packaging. And looking at the top here, we can see that this is a 3-sheet build, which means that it might have more detail and be a little bit bigger than what we're used to dealing with. Groovers, let's go ahead and take a look at the back. On the back, we get a nice look at our truck, and then just below, we have some instructions on how to build our model. On the right here, we have a QR code, which we can scan to get a 360 view of our model, and then at the very bottom here, we get a look at some other trucks in the series. Very cool. Then finally, on the right here, we have a difficulty rating, and this one is saying that this build might be a little trickier than what we're normally used to, but I think we can do it together. Groovers, let's go ahead and open up our package. We have our instructions, and we have our 3 sheets of metal. And look at all that paint. Oop, be very careful not to scratch them when taking them apart. Oh, so cool. Alright, Groovers, let's get building. And just like that, we have all of our parts needed for our first page. Now, this build has us starting off building the doors, so let's go ahead and grab part number 1 here and begin to shape it just by bending it ever so slightly, just like that, and of course matching everything up. And of course matching our seams, being very careful not to scratch that paint. Just bend this in a little bit until it matches up. Same thing here, go right to that seam on the inside. You can see the seam right here. Bend it forward. There we go. This little detail here gets bent down. And it gets slightly curved. I'm doing this little curve by grabbing the small bits of metal on the outside and slightly bending them in. Creates a good little effect. There we go, all nice and formed. Now we can grab part number 2 and do something very similar. Looking at the back, you can see these different groove marks here. Very important to follow those groove marks very carefully. Interesting, just like that, we have our piece inserted there. But before I actually secure this, I'm going to go ahead and put part number 3 in place, and that way if I have any issues once they're secured, I'll have part number 3 in place. And you can see why I didn't secure that right away, just in case I had any issues. Looking kind of snazzy, a little off center, and I'll fix that a little bit. There we go. Cool. Now we can grab part number 4. This little tiny guy right here, and we're going to bend these pieces in. This is a very small little rectangle we're bending right now. Okay. Now all these little detail pieces can be a little bit tricky, but I think if we just take our time with them, we should be okay. The hardest part is getting them in their slots, especially when it comes to these guys right here. Don't rush, don't scratch your paint.
With part number 4 now secure, we can move on to part number 5. It's our little mirror here. Now we're going to grab our door here. This is the engraved side. So if this is the engraved side, then we want our mirror to go on this side, according to the instructions. There we go. Now with our mirror all secured, we can move on to part number 7, which is the side of our truck. That is a very cool piece. Okay, I think that's correct. We'll see though. I might have to bend this a little bit less. All right. Let's grab part number 8 here. Make sure you don't accidentally install your vents upside down. I almost did. Very nice, very nice. Now we need to attach this door piece here. These tabs get bent backwards like this. Interesting. There we go. All right, I'm not really too happy with this little gap I have here, but all the forming I've been doing, I really can't get it out. I might try to do some sharper bends with my next side, just to try to get away with all these little tiny gaps. Part number 9 right here. Trucker mirrors, a pain in the butt when you're trying to aim them and a pain in the butt when you're trying to make them. Okay, I'm really liking how this is looking. This side door looks really neat. And with everything now looking nice and shaped, we can move on to our next piece right here. I think we're not going to be touching that for a little while now. It's just like we did on the other side here. And with that, we're looking pretty secure. Now we can move on to our next page, which means we need way more parts. And just like that, we have all of our parts needed for page 3. Now the first half of page 3 has us rebuilding this piece right here for the other side. I'm not going to show you that. Instead, we're going to use some YouTube magic. Well, that was pretty quick, and you know what? It was just slightly different. This part has a little bit of detail right here, and you can see in the doorway that the other side does not have. But really, outside of that, these are pretty much exactly the same, and when you're doing this little bit of detail piece, just make sure that you put the tabs on the outside, not into the inside. You don't want to see the tabs through that little tiny window there. Okay, now let's move on to the inside here, where we're forming our chairs. Bending this like this here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to kind of follow that little pattern we can see on the side of the chair here. Bringing it right down. And doing a slight bend right here. There we go. Push that side in. And now we're going to marry these two parts together. Or the two sides together, sorry. Oh, just missed that. There we go. Now when we close this latch, we're going to close it inwards just like this. And the reason for that is because there's actually paint on the tab, and it will help hide that little tab. Excellent. There's one chair done. And there's our second chair done. Oops, don't push too much on that end. You'll accidentally push that chair in. Okay, both of our chairs are now done. Now let's put them onto the base here. Making sure the engraved side here is up. Nice and secure. Good twists. Now we're going to put the side on here. Let's see if we can... I'm hoping that my bends actually were pretty accurate to what we needed to do. This would be a time where you're going to have to see if there's any gaps. And it looks like I have some here, which means I need to bend this piece a little bit more. Check out our cab. I think this looks pretty good, but now we need to move on to our steering wheel, which involves a very small cylinder. There we go. Part number 19 is our cylinder, and it's important to keep the engraved side out. Now, if you don't have a tool at home, you can always just make multiple small bends, kind of like what I'm doing right now, to help you get that nice cylinder. I'm just getting this started, but I am going to go ahead and use one of my tools here. Trick to using your mandrels, make sure you go big first and then work your way to the smaller sizes. This way you don't accidentally go too small, which might have happened here if I wasn't too careful. That looks okay. I have a little bit of a teardrop form right now. Now, instead of actually going ahead and putting it onto another mandrel, I'm going to attach it to the part and try forming it in place. Now, making sure that we put the engraved side here to the back. I'm just going to try shaping a little bit more there. There we go. Look at that nice cylinder that we got just by attaching everything together. Looks really nice. Now we need our little dashboard here, which is part 21. This here is the engraved side, so we need to make sure that that is slightly bent here. Okay, that looks pretty good, I think, for everything that we have. Let's go ahead and attach that little steering wheel that we formed earlier. There's our steering wheel all attached. And now we're going to form all of this detail on the inside, making sure to go a little bit slow because of how thin this part is. I'm actually going to use multiple tweezers here, and that's just so I don't accidentally warp the metal. Okay, part number 22 is now formed, and with all of this done, we're done with our page. We need more parts. And we have all of our pieces needed for the fourth page. Now we start off by building our top piece here just a little bit more with those pieces we just formed. These tabs, I'm trying to make sure that they all are bent the same way and that that white paint is on the outside. That way they kind of blend in a little bit. There we go. Now everything is a little bit better together. I'm gonna go ahead and put that down and start on our next few pieces, which is part 25 here and a whole bunch of smaller detail. Okay, with all of our small bits of detail here formed, we gotta attach them onto part 25. These are all connected with a nice bend.
Gonna fit those tabs in here like this.
Okay, I like that shape. Once we get everything onto the truck, I think I'll have a lot better idea about how it's supposed to be formed. Let's go ahead and move on to our next part here, which is part 30. All of our seams are nice and matched up. Now we can attach it onto part 29 here. Awesome, awesome, awesome. That looks really nice. Now for the moment of truth, we're going to add the back onto our truck, and then we're going to add that top piece. Now you'll notice I have a little bit of gaps here. We can work those out, especially because now everything is connected. We just got to push a little bit here, pinch a little bit there, using those border edges as our guide. Okay, I feel like I could have formed this a little bit better, but I'm pretty happy with it. Let's move on to our next step. Part 31 here. Now we got to put the step in here. I think that's how it's supposed to be formed. Very interesting. Let's move on to our next piece here, part number 33. That looks pretty good. The shaping around here looks really nice and sharp too. Now let's move on to part 34 here. And I'm going to need something to shape this. Okay, now that we're fully assembled on this side, we need to get more parts. And we have all of our parts needed for page 5. Now the first part of page 5 is just remaking this guy right here. So I'm going to go ahead and use that YouTube magic again. Whoop! There we go. Just like our other one here, everything went together pretty easily. And now that we have these two parts formed, we can actually add them onto our truck, which might be a little bit tricky because of how these are formed. Now we need our bumper here. Our bumper's pretty straightforward again, just bending these little 4 tabs. Now this little tab here I should have bent before, so I'm going to be very careful with how I bend it, but I think I can get it in the hole that I need to. Get it in. That front grille looks pretty good. I like how it looks. It's starting to look more like a truck with every bend. Now we need to move on to the lower half here, which I think we're building some air tanks. It's our first thing here.
Okay, and now we're going to start building this piece right here for number 45. Now, number 45 does have a lot to bend, but first things first, we gotta do the big bends here, and I'm gonna need a little bit of help. There we go. Now that's all formed up. We can go ahead and add our air tanks on. Very cool. Those air tanks look really neat on this. I like how it's slowly coming together. These air tanks look awesome. Very nice. Now we need to add the mud flaps on. There's our mud flaps all nice and attached. Now we can add our lights or reflectors. I'm not entirely too sure what this is supposed to be here. Okay, now we've completed all of our parts. We need more. All of our parts needed for page 6. And this time we're starting off with some really interesting detail. Let's first start with this little bracket here, which is just formed by folding all of our little pieces over. Always make sure to get as close as you possibly can to those fold lines. That'll make sure your parts are really nice and laser sharp. Okay, that's good. Now let's move on to this little tricky piece. And if you look at the instructions, it tells you to do something a little bit different. What it's telling you to do is make these into circles. So let's go ahead and start with this one here. Okay, so they're telling me to fold these one by one, and the reason why I think they're telling me to do that is because of how fragile this part really is, because of how tight all the metal is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the general shape first, and then I'm going to correct them. So I'm already getting a lot of paint flaking off, and I guess it's just because it's such a drastic bend. I've said before, air hoses on a truck are not necessarily straight, so the less that they are, the better. But at the same time, I really do recommend bending each one of these little bits here by themselves. Don't do it all at once. Okay, there we go. Our air hoses are all done. It's very important to bend each one of these individually. I think you'll get a better look. Let's move on to our next step, which is these little guys right here. Now that our little handles here, if you will, are installed, we can go ahead and start bending the stack. Now these little smokestacks here can be also a little bit tricky because of how thin the metal is. You might have to use more than one tweezer to get these done. These smokestacks were a little tricky to form, but they look pretty good. Now we need to attach everything to that platform we have here. Bring it over. First things first, we need our air hoses. This is looking more and more like a truck with all the parts we're adding on. Very cool. Now we can move on to the next stage, which is part 53, this guy right here. Again, with these pieces here, it's just very important to follow the seams along the side of the pieces. I won't be surprised if I need to form this a little bit more. I'm not too worried about it though, because everything is going to come together really well, I think, on this model. These are secured with a twist. One. And
Awesome. Now for this underwiring. With our engraved detail up here, we can now install it on our piece. Yes, I did put that in the wrong way. Yes, I did put that piece on the wrong way first. It's very important to double check your instructions, groovers. There we go. That looks pretty secure. Those two tabs were surprisingly difficult to get into place. Now we need to move on to our mud flaps, but these ones are a little bit different than the ones we've done before. We need part 56 right here, as well as this little W logo, a little Western Star logo here. We're going to bend these tabs, getting as close as we can to the edge. We don't want to have any overlapping of that tab left. We're literally going as close as we can to our W, and there we go, nice little bend. Now we're going to put this into our part 56 here. Basically just making this logo stand out even more so. Grabbing as much of the tab as possible and giving a little bit of a pull as we do that. Just to make sure as much of the tab as we can is enclosed. Look at that. Looks really cool. Now these border pieces, we got to bend the tab over, and this can be a little bit tricky. So if you find the metal bending on you, what I recommend doing is having some other tweezers here hold this piece as you bend the tab back. This will give you some extra support and hopefully won't warp your piece. But it seems to be doing pretty good. Like, I didn't have to do it with mine as I throw my piece across the table here. Bending those tabs back. Now we're going to bend these tabs, but I'm interested to see how they're going to secure with them bent like this. I would imagine that you would want to twist them. There we go. We have one mud flap done, and I'm going to get another one done here with the power of YouTube magic. Okay, there's our second mud flap. Now we need part 61 and our main body. Looks like we're putting everything on again here. Making sure the non-engraved side is going up. We're going to attach this right here. There's part 61. Let's put our mud flaps on here on the back. Looking pretty sweet. These little bits of detail here always tend to be a little tricky to get them formed correctly. Let's go ahead and bend this like that, and the other side just like this. These are the brake lights, of course. Now these little side pieces get attached here, and they go right over here. This is kind of a pain in my butt. Looking good. Next, we need to build this step right here, part number 64, and we're going to bend it with this engraved piece down in the middle there. So there we go. There we go. We might have to bend this slightly like that, and this like this. There we go. There's our stairs. Great. I don't like how loose these mud flaps are right now, but we're going to go back and secure them a little bit later when we go over the whole model and tighten up some of our connections. Okay, let's move on to our next step and grab some more pieces. And finally, we have all of our pieces needed to build our truck. Now, the first step we're going to be doing here is just attaching these two pieces together. And this might be a little tricky because of where these are located. Looking good, looking good. Very neat. Now this piece right here needs to go in, and we need to make sure that the non-engraved part, which is this part right here, goes up. Very good, very good. I like that. Just need a few more wheels on this baby and we can get rolling. We start our wheels by grabbing our little bits of detail here. This is part 66, and we're going to just bend it, and then we're going to follow it around, but we're going to make sure both sides are bent first. There we go. Little bends are the best way to get these nice cylinder shapes here. Don't try to do it in one go. You won't get that nice cylinder finish. These are getting more and more complicated. These small bits of detail really do make this truck stand out, but they can be super complicated to get together. Time for some treads. All right, let's see if I can get this bent. Problem is I don't want any hot spots to appear, and that is a very hard thing to do. What I'm going to actually do is use this wheel to kind of give me a little bit of a hand. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just ever so slightly bend it like this, and I'm going to hopefully be able to cap it. Very cool. First wheel. Now let's get the second one here done. Our two wheels all nice and formed. Let's move on to our next couple of pieces here. Just a nice little box, making sure all these seams line up. Very important. I really do recommend forming all of these pieces along this edge right here. That makes life a lot easier. Let's move on to our next step here. These little bits of detail here are secured with a really tight twist. Forming them can be a little bit tricky, but if we take our time, we should get them really nice and formed correctly. Looking good, looking good. Now we need to connect these two pieces together. Okay, and there we go, the other part C. Now we have two of these pieces. We only need to form these wheels right here. Let's go ahead and do that. Starting off with the cylinder here. These wheels don't turn, so you can have that little lip in there. And there we have it, all four wheels complete. That was a little bit of a mission, pretty repetitive after the first one, but hey, we're done, and now it's time to put the wheels onto our truck. All right, and the first thing we're going to be doing is, of course, attaching these little hubs here on the inside. Once we've done that, we can attach the wheels on the outside. We're going to do the front ones first, followed by the back ones. our truck is complete.
We did it, Groove Builders! We built the Western Star 5700 XE Phantom from Metal Earth. And ooh-wee, ain't she a shiny one! But that being said, she's not really an easy one, and if you're looking to build it at home, there are a few things you're going to want to know. Let's talk about those things in construction. My first point when it comes to building this truck is to make sure that you have the proper tools around to help you with some of the detail. With this build, there's a lot of small parts, and making sure that they're formed correctly is key to getting everything together. I recommend having 2 strong pairs of tweezers as well as a mandrel to get everything together correctly. Now, you don't necessarily need these tools, but they will make your life a lot easier. For my second point, because we're dealing with so many odd shaped pieces here, forming our pieces together can be a little bit tricky. My suggestion is to take the part that you're trying to form and match it along with the other edges of the pieces going together, like our roof here. Then follow the seams and slowly attach your tabs. After a little bit of play, you'll have the shape you want and a really nice looking truck. For my third and final point, let's talk about bending and twisting tabs. Pretty basic stuff, right? Well, yes and no. You see, with this build, the key to getting all of your detail on straight is to make sure that you're bending and twisting your tabs right at the base. If you don't, you'll find that some of your detail is a little bit off. I know that I had to go back afterwards and take some things apart and rebend their tabs just to try to get it to go on. Don't make that mistake. Do it right the first time and you'll have a really good looking truck. And with that being said, let's move on to build time. This Western Star truck took me just over 8 hours to build, with the majority of my time being spent trying to get the front here formed correctly, and of course attaching all the small bits of detail onto the frame. Now, Groove Builders, it's very important to remember that these builds are never a race, and you only get what you put into them. So make sure you take your time and really process each and every part. You'll be really happy with what you have in the end. And finally, Groove Builders, my thoughts. The Western Star 5700 XE Phantom from Metal Earth is a great build for any metal model builder out there who's looking for a little bit of a challenge. That being said, it's really not that difficult to build, although with all of its parts and of course unique shaping bits, it can give your tweezers a little bit of a warm-up, like these air hoses back here in the back. Each one of those circles has to be formed individually, and if you try to do it as a big group, you'll end up with a really big headache and a giant mess. With this build, you really have to follow the instructions really closely, and I would actually recommend double checking your work with the instructions before moving on to the next step. You really don't want to make too many mistakes with this model because the metal can get a little bit wary, especially with the mirrors right here just being held on with a very thin piece. At the end of the day, I would recommend this build for anyone out there who likes trucks and has a few metal models under their belt. Pick this up, you won't regret it. Alright, Groove Builders, that brings us to the end of our show. I had a really good time building our truck with you, and if you guys had a good time, don't forget to press that like button. For more videos like this, hit subscribe as well, as we got all kinds of really cool content coming out in the future. Until next time, Groove Builders, keep building. Hey, and thanks to Metal Earth for sending this to me. This is a really cool build.